Gina Gutierrez. No, wait. How do I properly say your last name?
You did it. You did it great. What's
Thanks.
up?
Okay, great. Okay, what a great start. Gina Gutierrez describes herself as insatiably curious about why people think, feel, and want what they do. As a seasoned brand builder, she's helped companies like Facebook, Google, Reebok, Third Love, DoorDash, and Stitch Fix find unexpected opportunities to make meaningful connections with their customers. In 2020, she was on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list. Right now, she is applying all that curiosity to female sexuality and empowerment with Dipsea, the platform where sexual wellness meets storytelling. It's Erotica created for women by women, and Gina is the co-founder. Gina, how are you?
I'm great. I need to record that and put that at the beginning of a podcast. That was the perfect ad.
I mean, you're the Forbes 30 Under 30. That's a deal, right? That's a big deal.
So. Yeah, I guess so. My mom was really proud. We got a little plaque to hang up about it, in my family house. So yeah, it's a pretty big deal, I think.
That might mean something, that your mom's proud. I don't really know what Forbes 30 Under 30 means. Does it mean you're incredibly rich?
No, that unfortunately does not. Unfortunately, it's not about money. It's more about ruthless ambition and a lack of money, actually, is probably what it is.
Well, I hope that changes soon. So tell me what Dipsea is in your own words.
Sure. So I think you said it really well. It's the intersection of storytelling and sexual wellness. You can access a ton of erotic audio stories via an app. So whether you have an Android phone or an iPhone, you can access the app there, or you can access a web app. And it's a beautiful experience. It's something you want to tell your friends about. It's really nicely branded, super sex positive. And these stories are designed to take you places and make you feel turned on. And the reason we wanted to do that in the first place is because we felt like sex needed a more mind-first approach. Like, if we're so quick to say sex is about bodies, and we thought that just was a totally incomplete picture of what the possibilities were.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is so much fun to tell people about Dipsea, because they're always like, oh, I thought of that once. I thought that would be 100%. A good idea once. You did it.
Totally. I mean, yeah, I hear that all the time, and that's great. Like, if it's an intuitive thing that people hear it and they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like, that's really exciting. But yeah, the making of it was harder than the thinking of it. That's for sure.
Oh, I believe it. I mean, I remember when I first heard about it, I was like, well, that's genius, because what you're doing is essentially you're literally creating porn for women. You're creating erotica for women. Men are going to go onto the internet, and the generality is usually that they're physically turned on, so they just need to look at something, and visually turned on, so they just need to look at something. Women need to hear, feel a connection. I think that Dipsea, their skill is creating a world which people can dive into and have their fantasy, and you do a beautiful job at it.
And I think that, women especially wanted something like this, where it was more story forward and more about connection and chemistry. But I think men want that too. So even though we started with women, I think it's pretty clear to me. I mean, you could speak to this better than me. Like, I think that there's a huge opportunity for men to have sex portrayed in a way that's less transactional and less like cut and dry and more erotic.
I agree. I never was particularly into porn, but I didn't mind. I always liked amateur, in the sense that if I could feel like there was a real couple, like there was real connection going on. But eventually, you were just like, their performances are terrible. Yeah. The scripts, you can always guess what's going to happen next. It's just dreadful. Whereas I think you're correct. I'm looking for something that's like connective, intimate, and like you're a fly on the wall, rather than
and like starts
where porn's at
earlier, right? Like, okay, you can just show me the sex, and I'm speaking about porn now. So if you just show me the sex, I'm missing all the beginning part. Like, when did the flirtation happen? Like, did they text each other? Like, what was the first eye contact like? How did they flirt? Like, all those things I think are really, that's like why we like movies and film and TV, because those parts are actually like illustrated by amazing makers. And so I think Dipsea's trying to create some sort of intersection of that, where we're like, it's not porn, and it's not just Bridgerton or whatever other show is hot and sexy right now. It's like something in the middle where we're creating content designed to turn you on, but it tells stories.
Yeah, I love that. I think my biggest question is, do you find that women are more into connective, soft, and intimate erotica, or kind of aggressive, edgy erotica? What are you finding your listeners are more into?
Totally. It's a great question. The truth is that everyone likes different things. Like there's this amazing quote by Dr. Emily Nagoski, who's like a pioneer in the space. And she always says like, everyone is different and everyone is normal. And I love that. It's like, we all want different things, but like, we're all also totally normal in our desires. And at Dipsea, we have to make a ton of content because people want really different things. Like you might listen to a story and I might listen to a story and my best friend might listen to a story and be like, that's not for me. Or be like, oh, I love that. And for lots of different reasons. And so we have to make enough content to satisfy all sorts of people, but we definitely see an interest in women showing towards more like intense, off limits, really exciting sex. And I think one of the things that we love most about Dipsea is what you say you're going to like and what you actually like are actually not always the same thing. So that's pretty interesting. And you can see that with relationship status, right? Like you could be in a monogamous, happy, long-term relationship and actually having great sex and want to be listening to stories about off-limits stuff or voyeurism or BDSM because it's outside of the lanes of what you're playing in your real life. And so we definitely see like a transgression between like what I live and what I want is not always the same thing. And a lot of people want to be dominated because we're all stressed out and we're all owning our lives and running our shit. And it's really, can I say shit? And we're all, you know, great. And we're all, you know, on top of it all the time. And so I think in sex, sometimes it's nice to enjoy the fantasy of someone else being in control.
Yeah, it kind of makes me wonder, like, you know, do people sometimes want to listen to fantasies that they don't actually want to live out? They get to have some space from it. And that's the joy of putting on some headphones and listening to a Dipsea story about some BDSM that you wouldn't necessarily want to do with your partner. You just get to go there in your head rather than ever have to physically live it out. Like that's the joy of fantasy.
Okay. This is a huge topic. This is one of the things I talked about in the TED Talk that I just did, which is I think there's a huge fear around fantasy being this kind of like gateway drug to bad decisions. Where you're like, if I fantasize about a professor, like, oh God, what does that mean? Like, do I actually want to do that? And we put all this pressure on ourselves and shame on ourselves and criticize ourselves for what's sexy to us purely in an imaginative place, where it's like not hurting anyone. And it's just, you know, it's just yours. It's super personal. And so I think it's really important for us to say like, sure, there are fantasies that you want to happen in real life. And then there are plenty more that you have no interest in pursuing in your real life. And once people get more comfortable with that, I think it feels a lot more like I can just allow myself to enjoy this. I can just like let myself be. And so that's a perfect example of one of those places where we're like, we trip ourselves up so much and like allowing ourselves to enjoy. And I think a lot of these cultural ideas of shoulds get in the way of that, you know. I think men especially really fear that, where it's like, you know, if I like this or I like thinking about this, like, does that mean I want to cheat on my wife? Like, no, it doesn't have to mean that you want to cheat on your wife. And actually, you have a lot of agency to decide in your own life what you do and what you don't do. You're not like at the mercy of your own brain. You are your own brain. And so it's like it's a pretty big conversation, but I think like fantasy does not have to be reality at all.
Yeah, it's kind of like we're trying to keep, I mean, for me personally, like sometimes you're trying to keep your brain on the train tracks and you don't want to go off just in case you venture into a spot that makes you feel unsafe or you're going to get in trouble. But the joy of it is that you're not going to get in trouble because it's in your imagination and it's all a fantasy. So you're not going to venture off somewhere that, you know, you might go somewhere that you may not like, but it's completely safe.
Exactly. That's, I think, so what a powerful idea to be like, my brain sometimes takes me places I don't want to go. Like we all know that, like stress is a great example of that. So if my brain goes a place I don't want it to go, I have the power to be like, whoa, that's interesting. I want to go over here instead and like redirect it. And so I think that there's something like really powerful, and Dipsea's one tool in starting to figure that out and being like, I'm the master of my own brain. And I can be like, nope, that didn't work for me. Whoosh, put that over there. And I'm going to go over here instead. And like that, like ownership and like mastery of our own brains, it's super empowering. I think that's really important for people to get more comfortable doing.
Yeah, wow. I wanted to talk about my Dipsea story and the production of it and how we started talking about it. And it was so interesting. I think my favorite bit was asking you and your team. We were contending with the idea that the husband and the wife in the story would maybe have a threesome. and we weren't sure if the listeners would be into that or not into that. Like some people would be like, well, I'd like this to not trigger me. Like, but then some people would be like, well, triggering me also turns to my arousal. So you kind of have to like, you're kind of playing with this idea that you want people to listen to it. You want more people to listen to it and enjoy it than not listen to it and enjoy it. And like playing with all those things.
Didn't you have a perspective on that? I kind of have a memory of you being like, I don't know if I want them to have a threesome.
I didn't want them to have a threesome because because one of my ideas going into it was I wanted to create a romantic, sexual, erotic relationship between a husband and wife. Yep. And I thought, well, if you're getting a third person involved in a deeply erotic way, then you're kind of like you're minimizing what's going on between the husband and the wife. I was still open to it though, but I think that it's so interesting that you must be thinking about those sort of things all the time.
Totally. I mean, different stories do different things. I think your story, your series, Act Natural, is so powerful because it shows a marriage that's really sexy and full of flirtation. And I think it was so successful in that. Like the relationship between Jake and Annie is so real and fun and playful and like aspirational. And I think you could totally imagine that series ends up in a threesome and everyone's like totally okay with that. And it's super consensual and people love it. Mm-hmm. And you can also imagine that not making that choice is like a really good one to be like, hey, you don't need a third person to come in and make this exciting. So I really liked that we kept the container tight around the marriage of Jake and Annie. I thought that was a great choice. But I could totally imagine a story where we show a happy monogamous couple and they do experiment with that. So what it really comes down to in terms of like triggering people and making sure that they're not triggered, it's just like labeling stuff really well. It's like literally down to those details. Like when you're in the Dipsea app, you need to make sure that something tagged infidelity is tagged that way, because if that's a trigger for you, because that's happened to you in your life, understood, right? Like no questions asked.
Got it.
But other people might be like, oh, infidelity, fun. Like that's not a trigger for me. That's like sexy and exciting in the fantasy world.
Yeah, I think I misspoke when I said that something that triggers you could also make you aroused. Perhaps something that you're a little bit afraid of can also lead to arousal rather than triggering. I thought that that the story was so sexy, or part of what made it so sexy was the idea that this guy became an overnight sex symbol and was so desired. And then for his wife, he was pretending to date this pop star, and she was desired by this famous pop star. And it was kind of these desire, like people getting to the way that I thought about it was, and the reason I thought it could be successful was people would get to imagine what it's like to be totally desired by their partner and then also totally desired by the outside world. And that's pretty sexy.
Yes, totally. I love that idea. It's like one of my, like, I'm annoying in the writer's room, like, let's do this again. Where I think like, I call this co-flirting. No one on the team has picked up this label, but I call it co-flirting, which I think is like in a monogamous relationship or in any relationship, when you see your partner being their best self, especially when they're talking to someone and they're being funny or they're being charming or being cool or even being like helpful, you see them and you're like, God, they're such a catch, right? It's like such a sexy moment. And the reason I like that so much is like when you see that happen with a partner, with someone who's like a really desirable person, like, I don't know, some hot woman at a party or even like a cute checkout clerk, you're like, man, like my partner's so desirable. Like people are into my partner, but then they give you a wink and you're like, but they choose me, right? Like, and that idea I think is so fun. Like we're not with our partners because we're like, all right, ball and chain, like it's you and me. You should be with your partner because you're like, I choose you and I keep choosing you and you keep choosing me. And like, that is so sexy. Like that to me is the flirtation that like no one was paying attention to in the media space. Like that's the stuff right there that I find really, really erotic.
Yeah, and it's something that you couldn't make a whole movie about, but you can easily do 15 minutes on it.
Very true. Very true. It's like a little like vignette of feeling. I think you're right.
Exactly. I think that's what you guys, that's what you're so lucky to, with this medium, is to portray those little moments that would go unspoken in a movie that you couldn't do 2 hours on, but you can dip into those little sexy moments like, you know, a clerk, you know, a checkout clerk checking out your husband or wife. Like that's hot.
Totally. What were some of the things that you thought were like important to get right in your story to make it hot? Do you like remember any moments that you thought that happened well between the two characters?
I remember in the first episode, there's a back and forth between me and my wife and her hall pass, who is this big actor who we were going to his house party up in the hills somewhere, you know. And I remember thinking, I have to beat this guy. I have to beat this guy to show her that he's your hall pass in fantasy, but not your hall pass in reality. And also, I loved playing with that. I loved playing with the hall pass idea, because when it got brought up somehow in a meeting, I'm not sure if it was me, I think it was like, yeah, but is an actual hall pass, meaning is she actually going to try and sleep with this person? And we all have those hall pass conversations with our significant others. And then what happens when you see them, though? You know?
It is a really like fun idea to be like, okay, the hall pass becomes real, because like how many people does that actually happen for? Like if I saw an actual hall pass at a party that I walked into, I'd be like, oh shit.
I know, you better get to work. It's your hall pass time, you know?
Right.
You don't, you never, like.
Be your charming self.
Exactly. It's once in a lifetime that you see your hall pass.
Totally.
Like, does that mean actually get to work? And what if your significant other is with you when you see your hall pass? Do you go, hey, I'm sorry, we talked about this. I'm going.
This has been pre-negotiated and I will see you later.
Yes, we've talked about this. I have it in contract. Like, anyway, see you later. With my Dipsea story, I really wanted to highlight a married relationship that was erotic and fun. And the reason I remember mentioning to you was that I believed that married relationships are mostly portrayed as lifeless and miserable and depressing, which may be true, but it's not wholly true of marriages. Do you find that listeners are preferring like kind of connective relationships between like a couple in the confines of a relationship, or are they preferring, I know that you said everyone's different, or are they preferring chance meetings, you know, sex between strangers, flings, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally speaking, it's skewed towards preferring chance encounter type stuff. But there certainly is an audience that is excited about relationships gone right, you know, like relationships where they've like figured out how to keep it fresh. And like, there's an early series that, you know, we made 3 years ago that's still really popular called Fixer Upper, which is almost like what you were describing. It's almost like you're like a fly in the wall in this Fixer Upper house that this couple just bought, and they just like manage to have fun sex all the time. And it just feels like you're like, whatever this couple's doing, they've got it figured out. And it's really, really playful and fun. And I think that your story does something similar, where it just paints this kind of like aspirational idea that you can know each other really well, but you can still play. And I think that that play is really important. So there's definitely some standout series that are like super, super high performers in the app and are couples. But I think people are excited by the idea that they might just like have a meet cute, you know, on the subway or whatever.
Totally.
It just like makes life exciting.
As well as that, different things for different days, you know, like One day you want to kind of get into a relationship and next day you want to like, you know, have sex with a yoga teacher or something.
Exactly. And, you know, maybe you're not dating a yoga teacher.
Yes, exactly. But I wanted to ask you about that because, you know, you mentioned the professor fantasy before, and you know how that's kind of like an unethical thing, isn't it? If you're a student to have sex with your professor, that's kind of unethical. Do you guys go there? Does Dipsea go there, or do you kind of choose to stay away from those things?
Yeah, great question. I mean, a lot of it's gray area where we're like, people are excited by ideas that are in real life considered unethical. And like, we know that. Like, taboo is a word that describes a real thing. And so who are we as Dipsea to say your fantasy is like bad? And who are we as Dipsea to say, yeah, we're going to create fantasies that are in demand? And so we like basically do that in a really like art meets science way, which is like, how can we make it feel safe enough that people feel like Dipsea's doing a good job with this? I feel safe in this story. So for example, professor stories we tend to do with grad students. Is that ethical? No, it's walking an ethical line, but it just feels a little different than like an undergrad student and a, you know, much older professor. We had a series where there was a dalliance between a therapist and a client, which is like super unethical. We made two choices there. One, we made it not be a male therapist and a female client because we felt that was just extra kind of scary for a female listener.
Right.
We decided to make it a queer story. And we also painted it we couched it as like, I've had this fantasy and I've always dreamt about this. So you kind of don't know if the story is someone's imagination or if you're really in the environment. So like, do those solutions fix everything for everyone? certainly not. Like there's some people that would be like, I'm not listening to that story. It's not for me. And that's great. Like what we want to do is basically say, if you want it, you can find it. And if you don't want it, then you can avoid it.
Something for everybody, unethical and ethical.
And like hopefully unethical in a way that feels like you're like, I get why this is
Totally.
here, you know? I wouldn't do this. I don't want this. And yet, like, what's James like? You know, the professor from the sociology department. And yeah, that like edge of, it's what you talked about, I think before, where you're like, is something right at the edge, like that place right at the edge is like, you know, there's energy right there, right? It's like the connection. It's the
yeah.
Like, should we not? I think that's where stories get really, really fun. And that's what our team does a really good job of. Like, where do you get that energy from?
Yeah. Having sex at a Hollywood party in the person whose house. No, wait, no. So this is what actually happens in that first episode. We have sex in her hall passer's walk-in wardrobe.
There's a lot of like hall closet metaphor going on in that.
Right. But that's sexy in a way that, I mean, even though I was involved in the production, like that's sexy in a way that I hadn't even thought about.
And one of the things I think that's sexy about that is like, we cannot get caught, right? Because if we got caught, it would be embarrassing. If we got caught, we might get kicked out. If we got caught, it's just loud and weird and we can't get caught. And so, okay, like if you can't get caught, then suddenly we've just created real tension. And so that's just one example of how you can really like up stakes in stories to make it really fun and sexy.
Yeah, that's hot. That's hot. I want to talk about generalities because the generality with desire is that men are visual creatures, you know, who are always ready to go, and women are complicated and it takes time to stoke their desire. What do you think of those generalities?
Yes, I think like starting off by calling them generalities is exactly right because they don't apply to everyone and it's not like exclusively gendered, but the patterns are there between the sexes. And so what I would say is there's a doctor named Dr. Kaplan who does something called, or talks about something called the triphasic model of sex. And so that's the first beginnings are like, do I long for, do I have an appetite for, am I excited for sex? That's desire. And then arousal is like, am I like literally in the feelings of getting turned on and getting excited? And then am I at orgasm, meaning like climax and release? And I think that for men, you know, we all know like, oh, men are more visual and women are more into reading stories or audio. And that's, I think from experience now running Dipsea, we think is true, but there's not a ton of research that says that that's true. Like we could probably do some research on our users and actually make that more verifiable. But what we have seen is that, you know, there's a reason there isn't a equivalent of Viagra for women because solving it purely from a physical perspective doesn't do it for women. And one of the reasons for that is because there's sometimes non-accordance between arousal, like the physical experience of arousal, and desire. So I think you could say this and most women are like, sure. Where like your body sometimes isn't doing what your brain wants it to do and vice versa. Like you might be like physically aroused and turned on and be like, oh no, I don't want that to happen and vice versa. And so we hear a lot about the downsides of that. It's like, it's hard for me to get in the mood or like, unless things are perfect, I'm not into having sex or like my partner wishes I initiated more. Like we all know the downsides of it. But I think, you know, at Dipsea, we come out with a little more optimism and we're like, there's upsides to it too, because women, because they have such strong cognitive process in addition to physical experience, can literally think their way into arousal, which is harder for men to do. So that's pretty interesting. It's like, yes, it is harder to get things perfectly right, that you're like mentally there and physically there, but also that you can do it in the reverse. And that's pretty empowering. So yeah, we hear a lot about the fact that it's like women are complicated and it's not even untrue. Like I think women's systems are more complicated where I think Faye, my co-founder, and I feel frustrated is like, just because something's complicated doesn't mean you don't solve it. Right. Like we can still try. So.
Yes. I've heard you say that before, of which it's like, you know, oh, female desire is complicated. And that's always the end of the conversation rather than, okay, isn't that just the beginning of the conversation?
Right. Right. And yeah, like I get people like silver bullets and like easy solutions, and Viagra is a really proven tried and true solution, right? For male ED. And that's so like simple and great. Amazing. I think even that is a little bit of a misnomer, because I think to say that men are not having mental experience having sex and all they need is a clinical solution is like, yeah, like maybe that's true for most people, but there's plenty of people that are like hung up on their own stuff, like their own shame or their own embarrassment or their own discomfort with their own body. So like, could everyone use more of a boost, getting more comfortable in their imagination and more comfortable using their brains for positive sexual experiences? Like, yeah, 100%. And that's agnostic of sex or gender.
Yeah, and even though they're generalities, I do think that the generality that men are always ready to go, that they're, visual creatures who are like, these big dumb animals who are just, ready to have sex at a drop of a hat. I think it's been really damaging to a lot of men who aren't particularly sexual people.
Yep.
And, they get into a relationship and their girlfriend's like, why isn't he just always trying to claw at me? And it's like, well, because we all have our own like sexual appetites, and they're different, and they vary person to person. And yeah, I've found that to be a fairly damaging stereotype about men.
Yeah, you're so right. I think because women have been so, unsupported in these spaces, and because it's so new that they're getting support in these spaces, I'm happy that the conversation is centered on women. But I think you're totally right that like the pendulum then swings in the other direction. You're like, we're not a happy, healthy society sexually if men are also feeling like the current system isn't letting them be their true selves. And I think that, one of the things you just described is like, once we get more comfortable as a culture talking about sex, once it starts coming out of the shadows and becomes more normal, which podcasts like this are helping with, right? Like anything can help with, it's more likely for a heterosexual couple to have a real conversation about like why their sex life is what it is, or could be better, or like, what they could use some support on. Like, it's pretty novel for a man to tell his partner like, hey, it's actually like really hard for me to get turned on when this is like this, or this is like this. Like, what if we did this differently? Like, I can't think of any female friends that have told me that their male partner has approached them that way, but they've certainly done that with their male partner. So I think you're right. Like, where do men get the space to do that? That's going to be an important part of a better, more sex positive culture too.
Yeah, it's interesting because, talking about it, like you mentioned, and talking about these taboo subjects, I come from a Christian background. I am a Christian myself, but I don't see the issue of talking about sex openly. It's like the mention of the fantasy. It's like, why can't we go there? It's completely safe. It's completely safe to talk about. I don't see why we shouldn't be talking about this, even if you're from a religious background. It's like, how do you think that you were created? And don't you get off yourself? And like, can't we talk about that?
Did you like always feel like sex is good and important?
I never felt that it was. I was taught that sex was only good in certain. I was taught that sex was only good at certain times, like only if you're married, for instance. And it's like, well, yeah, that's all well and good for people who are married or at the age where they can get married. What if you're a 16-year-old like horny boy, and you're being told that your sexuality is not good and don't do it? Stop playing with yourself. It's like, how does that help me in any way, shape, or form? I'm on a hormone train and I can't get off it. And your only advice to me is to stop doing it. It's like, no.
Totally. It's like trying to put like the cap back on a Coke bottle that's been filled with Mentos. It's like, okay, like try your best, do your worst.
It's literally that. But then it continues on, and then you get out of high school, and you get out of that, masturbating every day all the time, and you get into the real world and hanging out with women and then casual sex, of which you're told that's not good either. And it's like, okay, so when does it become good? It's only within this little frame. So it's like
the avocado problem, right? It's like an avocado is like unripe. And then it's like, why aren't you married? Why aren't you having great sex? Like, you're like, what the hell? Like, I'm trying my best here. Totally. There's like, and I think that what you're describing is actually people just feeling really uncomfortable with sex in anything but the most specific example, which is like, you are now like, I don't know, settled enough that you should have babies. And so now you're ready for sex. And yeah, like I think at Dipsea, I feel like there's still a really clear ranking of what we believe good sex is. It's like sex for babies. Absolutely. We love that. Sex for the health of your relationship. Seems pretty important. Yeah. Seems good. Sex for yourself. No. Selfish. Terrible. Right? Like there's like a stack rank of that. And I think if anything, if we started with teenagers and did the reverse and being like, hey, get comfortable with yourself, figure out what you like, figure out what you don't like, how much easier would that be the first time you had sex to be like, oh no, actually I don't think I'm super into that. And then like have a conversation around that. Like that would be like mind blowing.
How many people use lube the first time when they lose their virginity? No one.
Zero.
Like,
I would guess.
It's just not a thing.
Probably.
But exactly. So if you were like to learn about how to please yourself first and really get into that and really get good at it, then you could maybe ask for, I mean, but then you see, then you're missing the part of it where you can get really good at pleasing yourself, but then you actually openly have to communicate. And that's something that you learn over time with people, how to communicate what you want and what you're okay with.
Totally. And, you know, when you come from shame-based backgrounds, or it sounds like you came from a background where sex was scary, but you had your own ideas that kind of overrode that. And that's awesome. I'm sure there are other people like you, but there's plenty of people that are still struggling with that kind of a background. And yeah, it's like, if you can't name the things that you want, if you can't say the things that you want, like arguably you're not ready to have sex. But that applies to plenty of like 30-year-olds, you know, like none of us got great sex educations. Like, if anything, I feel like there's such relief in being like, we're never done learning about sex. Like there's a reason people say sex is great in your 40s, right? Like they're not lying. That's not some like myth to make you feel better about getting older. They're just like, they're saying what they want at 40 in a way that they're probably not at 20. But
I've never heard that before. I've never heard that before. Sex is great. Yeah, I've never heard that before. Would that be because like they're so deeply comfortable with everything that's going on that they're like, yeah, we only have it once a week, but I tell you what, we take the night off when we have it, you know?
Okay, so do you actually watch the Kardashians, or do you just watch the outtakes of their ads? Because they literally talked about this in the latest episode of the Kardashians.
I walk past it when my mother-in-law and wife watch it, and I am known to sit and watch it because I think it's really fun.
You're one of like the perchers. You perch at the edge of the couch and you're like, what's happening here?
Exactly. I do find them, I do like them. I really do. So they were talking about sex is better in the 40s?
Yeah. Kim was like, I love sex in my 40s. Apparently their grandma said to them like, oh, just wait for your 40s. Sex is better. You know, everyone has their own, like, I know what's up about sex, and like has their own little spiel about what's good or what's bad or whatever. But I have heard that before. And I think like what the story that makes sense to me is like, as you get older, you become less ashamed of being like, yeah, I know what I want. But I think it's really, you know, it's kind of crazy what you were saying before about, you know, these horny 16-year-olds. It's like, yeah, at our horniest, at our like teenage years and in our college years, we like want the most sex, but we are the least equipped to have it. And I think that there's like this especially crazy thing where like men are made to feel like they should know everything. Like you should just come like hard coded with knowledge about how to please a woman. And then women are just believe like, it's not about you, it's about the man doing it. This is obviously a very hetero conversation, but let's just start there.
Yeah. Sure.
And so, you know, the first time you have sex, you're like, both are kind of disappointed. The man's like, I didn't know what to do. And she's like, why didn't he know exactly what to do? It's like, God, you don't want a 22-year-old jock being the person telling you this is how you want your body touched. You know what I mean? It's like, we're setting ourselves up for failure. Yeah.
Yeah. And you're just not taught how to communicate in general, like let alone sexually. Communicating with people of the opposite sex or communicating with people that you're attracted to is difficult in general. And then when it's about something that's very sensitive, like sex, I think like, look, I think we could all still, like, I don't care what age you are. I reckon you're still learning how to do that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Like,
and like,
yeah,
making that feel more normal feels like a pretty great thing too. It's like, I don't know. Do people dating in their 30s have it all figured out? Like, no, of course not. You know, and we need to give each other some grace on not doing it perfectly every time. And I think that's become more challenging these days, where people are very careful about the language that they use. And that's generally a good thing, but it can add a little bit of a stress where it's like, I really want to get this right. And no one's ever going to get it perfect. You know, perfection is not the bar.
My mother-in-law at a dinner party the other night, her name's Tracy. She's hilarious. At a dinner party, she was saying, that she thinks that women should 5 minutes before sex should go into the room by themselves and listen to somebody talk to them who wants to have sex with them, right? Like a recording. And everybody laughed. And I didn't laugh because I was like, well, actually there is something like that. And everyone wasn't aware that Dipsea existed. And I told everyone,
did you tell them?
There's this thing called, I was like, there's this thing called Dipsea where it is like erotic stories, and it can be erotic monologues of somebody talking to you and telling you how they're gonna, they're gonna get you. And everyone's like, as if the guy would do that. And I was like, are you kidding? If my wife was like, we're gonna have sex, but give me 5 minutes, I'd be like, I'll be waiting right here. I feel great about that.
Totally. Yeah.
But I was so fascinated that my mother-in-law, this had been her idea for years, that she knows that women need to go and do that in order to have a better sexual experience.
Yeah. Do you consider yourself like a pretty verbal person? Like, are you like in the love languages? Are you like a verbal affirmation kind of guy? Do you know?
I am.
Yeah. I think like that's lucky, because I think a lot of men struggle to like verbalize their, like, even like the idea of trying dirty talk, I think can be challenging for a lot of men. It's like, oh God, I just don't know what to say.
Yeah.
So that's another thing. It's like sometimes just hearing people in stories, which is helpful for male partners too. Hearing people in stories say things that sound normal, you're like, oh, okay, like I could do that. That's less like embarrassing or cheesy or scary than I thought. But I think because we have seen this connection now with Dipsea for 4 years, that people do love audio, and that being whispered to in such a way is like really exciting. Like there seems like a lot more opportunity for partners to do that with each other.
Yeah, I think so. I think once you can, for instance, if you're a guy out there listening to this who isn't that good with, telling somebody what you really want to happen, write down what your fantasy is. Write down any fantasy. Doesn't have to be too fancy. Then say it out loud to yourself. Then say it to your partner. And doesn't have to be beautiful, or like, you don't have to deepen your voice. Like, just say it. And then the next time you're making love, say it again and have them say it back to you. Like, I think it's like there's something in there,
Totally.
like where you just start speaking it, and then it becomes less cringy.
I agree. We have to like get over the hump of the cringe, because there is that like barrier there. But yeah, just like saying it, and also like saying it in the heat of the moment when things are already like moving and you're like in the groove of it. Like you just have so much more leeway to try things out. Totally. But I think like that's also done in film and TV so often. Like a woman asking a man, do you have a fantasy? And the guy being like, no. That happens all the time. Like I just watched a Friends rerun, and Ross finally tells Rachel, like, yeah, I love Princess Leia. And like, it took him like, half an episode to even say it. It's like this constant trope that we're like still playing with from the 90s, which is like the woman wants to hear it and the man's reluctant to say it.
Yeah, I think it's funny, especially after years in a relationship. I say that I'm a verbal guy. However, like, I do find that I become more and more of a silly, like a big, stupid man as time goes on, who's like maybe less willing to do the beautiful romantic things that would get, an early relationship in the mood for sex. I find that like it's more of a, let's just say you spend 24 hours a day with somebody. The love languages need to be spoken across the 24 hours rather than the half an hour before you really want to have sex. That's what I've learned.
So true. So
that it's like, hug him in the morning, give him a kiss, give him a little rub of the shoulders as you walk past without expecting sex.
Yep.
Then, ask him, are you hungry? Have you drunk enough water? Like get him some water, get him some food. And so the love languages are spread across 24 hours. It sounds like manipulation, and it kind of is, but you spread the love language across 24 hours rather than just when you want the sex.
Yeah. And like, I think what you're saying is exactly right. Like you go in expectationless, but hopeful, right? You're like,
yeah.
And that's like kind of the balance that you strike. But I think what you're saying is so true. Like so many of us now work from home, and like we're separated by a wall, if that even. There's so much less mystery. You're hearing them like on crappy work calls, and you're hearing them, I don't know, make their sandwich for lunch, and it's like not sexy. And so you also need to like separate from each other. Esther Perel talks about that a lot in this, like, what consistently do couples say about the moments that they're most attracted to their partners? It's when they haven't seen them for a while and they see them again. And so you have to like create some like separation and some mystery, even if that's as simple as like, this funny thing happened to me on my walk to the grocery store. Cause like, it needs to be things that you're not sharing together all the time. Like, it's like someone else has a life outside of what you are sharing is really sexy. The same way we were talking about before. Like you see partner being like super charming at a party and you're like, oh my God, I'm so attracted to you. We need to make that. We need to manufacture that. We need to be really intentional about that. And that's something that you said in your interview with one of our producers that I loved. It's like, you can't just wait for eroticism to come to you. You have to like go out there and be it and make it. And once you get in the groove of that, the same way once you start, I don't know, going to yoga a couple times a week and you're like, oh, this is not that hard. I can keep doing this. Like you get yourself into a good pattern, I think, and you have more sex. Easy as that.
Yeah,
simple,
and live
solved.
in fantasy land. It's not done.
Yeah.
We've just solved it. But I think living in fantasy land in your head a little bit too. Like, what are you aroused by? Live in that a little bit. That way you can like actually have a sexual imagination. Don't
you think that's connected to the fact that we all suck at being bored these days? Like we're using our imaginations less.
Yeah, you've nailed it. And I didn't know that was like a thing of the last couple of years because, you know, ever since COVID, obviously we're on our phones so much more. We're connected to social media and stuff so much more. And I guess I was hoping that it wasn't from that we're losing our imaginations, but it totally is. You need to be bored, don't you, in order to have a good imagination?
Yeah, you need some space to daydream. Like I think daydreaming and sexual fantasy are like, you know, they're basically one and the same, and you need some space to like let your mind spin. I sometimes find that like creatively, like from a job perspective, that I do my best work when I'm like not thinking about work because it just comes to me. But those moments are so rare. It's like when you're traveling and like, I don't know, on a train or something or on an airplane and you have like a second with no Wi-Fi, you're like, okay, like now I'll just like use my brain and think. But it always feels like, wow, I haven't done this in a while, which is shocking. You know, I haven't used this thing in a while.
I often feel like part of my problem is that when I'm in the shower, for instance, I'm like, oh, I'm in the shower, I have nothing to do. Oh, maybe do you gratitude practice now? And it's like, no, just be in the shower. You know, it's always like you're alone. So just, you know, you're alone. You're like, oh, how do I use this time to the best of my ability? So when I'm working out, I have headphones listening to a podcast, which is okay. But it's like, well, why not just work out?
Okay,
why not just do the thing that you know?
I have a hot take. So I have a hot take that I think men are specifically susceptible to this like thing that's happening these days of like self-improvement. So like any time that you have that's free for yourself is for self-improvement. Like my house is stacked with like fiction that I read and then stacked with business books that my fiance reads. And sometimes I'm just like, I don't know, like there's some sort of like allegiance or commitment to self-betterment where I'm like, wouldn't you just benefit from a walk without headphones? Do you feel like that you're susceptible to that?
Yes. See, what needs to be written into these books is also let it go. Once you learn it, forget it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
You can become obsessive so easily in such things, you know, to the point that like, you should see my supplements, for instance. Like, it's like, wow, like I've been obsessed for years and now I'm not. And I'm like, look at all these vitamins that sit here that once upon a time, if I didn't have, I felt like, oh gosh, I must be so unhealthy if I'm not taking my L-theanine every day.
Right. It's ridiculous. I guess it's like the pendulum's always swinging us back to moderation and like sex is the same and everything else is the same. Oh, that's another thing that's like really, you know, talk about myths. People always ask me like, how often should I be having sex? I get that question all the time. And like, there's no good answer to that. It's like, if you want sex every single day and that's what makes you feel happy, then like you need to talk about that with your partner, find a partner that wants that. But like, not everyone's going to want to have sex every day. Some people are totally satisfied having sex once every 2 weeks, and that's great for them. And like, if you're having sex every day and sex sucks, and you're like not enjoying it, you're not present, you're like, you know, totally spacing out during it. Like, do you just check the box and say like, I had sex? No, you optimize for quantity. So I think like another thing that is so, I don't even know where these rules came from. Like what, like weird Farmer's Almanac from 1892 told us like have sex once a week for a happy life. Like who's telling us these rules? But like we all have these ideas of what it should be.
Yeah, and also feeling like, you know, maybe your partner's perfectly happy having sex just as often as you. You just haven't ever asked.
Yeah, totally.
It is funny how like when I ask my followers to ask you questions, I get questions as if you're a sex therapist.
I know. I was wondering like, on this podcast, I was like, how many times am I going to have to say I'm not a doctor?
Right.
Maybe like once or twice.
I sifted through a lot of them so that, you weren't, like somebody was asking, I'm having a lot of sex past, like lot of my sexual past is coming up in my thought life all the time now. Why is that? And I'm like, well,
Yeah.
I'm sure she's got a good take on it, but she's not a professional in this way. Actually, do you have a take on that?
I mean, I have my own takes based on what I've seen talking to customers and what I've seen and what they want. One pattern that we have seen is that older customers, so let's say 45 plus, tend to like stories that involve people that they already know in their lives. So like it's sexy for them to imagine someone that they used to date in college re-entering their lives as a new person. That's something that you don't hear as much about from a 25-year-old, for example. So there is something that is like very seemingly natural in our evolution of like the subjects of our fantasy become more retroactive as we get older. So that does seem to be a pattern. In terms of feeling like overrun by it or overruled by it and like not enjoying that, I could say less to that. You know, there's plenty of books I'm sure that would tell you that, you know, the ideation around your past partners are, you know, a complicated like comparison game that we all play. And I'm not really sure what it would mean.
Well, here's some other questions from followers. How do I bring up the idea of using Dipsea to my partner? Hold on, let me say it so it's nice and clean. How do I bring up the idea of using Dipsea to my partner if they're not that creative?
Yeah, this is a great one. I think like make it about you instead of making it about them. Like this is something that I really enjoy. This is something I think is really sexy. I think it's really fun. It turns me on. Like make them excited about it for you before you have any ask and just see what comes from that. And if they exhibit curiosity, amazing. Then maybe you have the setup for the next conversation. And if they exhibit some sort of fear or aversion, then explore that. What is that about? And you're going to have some sort of interesting conversation. Just by saying like, hey, this is something that works for me. I would just start with you.
That's a really nice way of putting it. Why are people attracted to bad guys and serial killers? Shouldn't that be a major red flag?
I mean, arguably could be a red flag, but I think people's fantasies and what they want in real life are not the same thing. And like, I will fight that myth to the death. So I think the whole like bad guy, bad boy fantasy archetype is something that you see again and again and again. You see it in fan fiction, you see it in the romance market, you see it in porn, and you see some examples of it on Dipsea. And we try and dipsify it, but you know, that's a very common thing. And I think a lot of it is like, where does the power come from? Where does the adventure come from? Who's whisking you out of your everyday life and into something different? Why are you uniquely liked by that bad guy, right? These are all ideas that people really like to play with, even if they're not necessarily like addicted to the idea of being with a bad person.
I love that. Character development in your stories. How do you keep it interesting when it's all about sex?
It's hard. I think that this is something that the writers would say is like one of the biggest challenges, which is if every episode has sex in it, pulling a plot, you know, forward with that much sex can be challenging. And so you have to start with the characters exactly like the question asked. You have to be like, why does this person want this thing? And how is that interesting connected with another character that wants something else? And so what we say a lot is it's not just about character one and character two, it's what happens between those two characters. And you might actually realize once you start writing that it's not working. And you actually like need a different character because whatever they're creating together isn't working. And so that core tension between those two people is something that we focus on way more than a traditional writer's room might think about. We're always like, what's happening between these two people? Because that's the interesting part of the story.
Yeah, I love that. Have you copped, I know this is a bit of a personal question, but have you copped much judgment from your family for what you do?
Yeah, you know, less than people might imagine. I think in the beginning, my parents were like, what a weird pet project. Like, okay. Like, do you? Like, I think that they were like, I trust you, but also like, what a weird way to spend your time. And then we started getting a couple, you know, we got the Forbes 30 under 30 and we got like a big New York Times piece and I got a piece in the New Yorker. And I think my parents were like, honestly, like I just underestimated you. Like I didn't think it was going to be a real thing. It went from like Gina's weird project into like an actual reality. And then at that point, I think my parents were, you know, cautiously excited to tell their friends about it, right? Where they were like, I don't really know what it is, but it seems to be going really well. Yeah. So I think like Incredible. Generally I felt pretty supported. But the challenges really come in all sorts of other ways. Like, you know, Luke, you and I talked about before we got on here about like, what does it mean to ask personal questions versus, professional questions? Like people are very curious about my own life, which can be challenging. And people can be very quick to be like, oh, that's cute. That's like this little woman's thing, right? Or be like, whoa, that's like really bad and dangerous. Like people come with their own judgments. It's less about me, I think, and it's more about them,
Yeah, I wanted to, if you don't mind me asking, you did mention like, what was your wording? You said, it's hard to be taken seriously as like a female entrepreneur, and why, is that what you said? I just want to get your wording right.
I
think you said something like
it's
that.
something that I work hard at. I work really hard to be taken seriously as a female entrepreneur in sex. Totally.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that would, and so that would be difficult because people would go, well, okay, so what are you into? Like, what's your sexual fantasy? Like, is that what's going on?
I think, sometimes that happens. People are generally pretty respectful and curious and open-minded and great. Like, so I'd say like 9 times out of 10, it's not a problem. But, there are definitely moments or meetings that I have with people kind of like in the infrastructure of startups, like banks or venture capitalists or, advertising partners, you name it, who just don't get it, who just don't get what we're doing, why it's important. Maybe they think it's kind of like embarrassing and weird, or maybe they think it's like actually not good for the world. And having conversations with people like that are really important gatekeepers to platforms, to money, to access, means that I'm doing a lot of like, hey, like you can trust me, right? Like you can trust that even though everything that you've come to expect from this space has felt bad to you, that I can create something a little bit different. And that's where like being seen as legit matters so much. It's like this social currency where they're like, all right, like she seems a little different. Like, I think I can trust her. And a lot of it comes down to that. It's like that personal. It's like, all right, like show me what you've got. And that's meant, us getting back on the Google Play Store. Like we were kicked off the Google Play Store for a while. We had a meeting. Faye and I drove down to Google with our matching turtlenecks. That was an accident. Drove down to Google in our matching turtlenecks to be like, hello, like we are 2 women trying to create something that empowers women. And we totally understand that we got caught in your policy net, and we totally get why that net is there. But like, let's explain to you why what we do is really important. And so, yeah, it's really important that people take us seriously. Otherwise, those meetings don't go well. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Speaking of taking you seriously, your co-founder, Faye Keegan, is that her real name or is that an alias for Kay Fegan?
Okay, that's funny that you say this because your name is very hard to say. At Dipsea, we're always like, Luke Kook. Luke Kook?
Really?
Yeah, like for whatever reason, like we just can't, it keeps happening. Yes, that is Faye Keegan's real name. Also, very fun fact about Faye Keegan is that her middle name is Regina. So her middle name is my name. So we really are a true yin and yang.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yes,
well, I'll tell you a funny story. I'm going to name drop right now. So my first TV job in America was playing RuPaul's assistant, his evil assistant in this sitcom.
Nice.
And he was like, you should change your name to Lucas. It should be Lucas Cook because Luke Cook runs into it himself. And I was like, yeah, I just don't want to be someone else. I just want to have my own name.
Like, this is my name and I'm going to keep using it. I mean, fair enough.
Yeah. I don't know how people can change names and just, I think I would find that really difficult.
Totally. But you're a very authentic person. Like who you are as a person and who you are as an actor seems to have like a lot of interplay. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't ever want people to be like, oh, we'll hire Luke Cook to play himself type thing. I guess because I kind of am a character actor, but there's definitely a lot of interplay between me and myself and me, the actor, for sure. Yeah. I wanted to ask you about, because we were talking about the female entrepreneur thing, how to not quit as a woman in business. Have you got any advice for how to keep at it?
The biggest question, because quitting is easier than not quitting. Yeah. Let me try to answer that question really thoughtfully. I think that putting a team around you that you like really trust and love and enjoy and, carry the weight of doing hard things with you is so critical. Like I would not still be here if it wasn't for my co-founder, Faye. I would not still be here doing this if it was not for my team. So I think like putting people around you that you really trust and like, that intersection I think is really important. It's like, are they good at their jobs and do you like get enjoyment with them? Matters a lot. So I think that people really matters. I think I'm a big feeler. Like I feel things really, really powerfully. And I really had to figure out over time how to figure out where that could be a superpower and not just a downside, because, you know, rejections would happen or we wouldn't get money or, you know, whatever. The things that just are unexpected and hard about running a business happen over and over and over again. And about year 2, I started feeling like, oh my God, like I'm running dry. Like I'm a punching bag. Like I can't keep doing this. And then I realized, okay, like I need to figure out a way to be like, this is Dipsea and this is me. And like, I hope that Dipsea keeps going and I hope that Dipsea survives. But like, if it doesn't, I don't die with it. And that sounds kind of abstract until you get there yourself, I think. But like separating yourself and what you do became really, really important for me and actually gave me a lot more power where like bad things would happen. And I'd be like, all right. And you know who's really good at this is Faye Keegan. She has this famous quote that we quote all the time that says, if we treated every crisis like it was a crisis, we'd be dead. And so we don't anymore.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I mean, what I love about it the most is like I get something out of that. That's like I should, you know, I'm a big feeler too, and rejection is like crazy in the acting world, obviously, because you're constantly hearing no, or you don't even hear the no. It's just a no, you don't even get to hear it.
Yeah.
And separating yourself from the brand is, and you know, you the out-facing you, the business you, separating who you are, your worth from all of that. That's gold.
It's super gold. And it's one of those things where like, until you're ready to take in the advice, it just sits as advice. Do you know what I mean? Like sometimes people will be like, well, what would you tell your younger self? Or what would you tell yourself at the beginning of Dipsea? And I'd say anything I could tell that person, she would not listen to. She wouldn't be ready to listen to it. And so I think all you can hope with advice is that like maybe 2 people today hear that and they're like, that describes me today and I'm ready to take it in. But you know, everyone else needs to get there themselves or like do their own version of what that is. And that's, you know, the truth. It's like hard things bring you lessons. And so even when you're like, God, this is so hard, like how are we going to keep doing this? Which we've had plenty of moments like that at Dipsea. Then you're like, well, I'm learning, you know, I'm like getting stronger. It really is true. It's like a good silver lining. Yeah.
You're forged by fire and water.
Forged by fire.
You're molded
100%.
that way.
100%.
I wanted to ask you about your TED Talk. You've got a TED Talk. Let me just clarify. It's not a TEDx talk. It's a TED Talk.
It's a TED Talk.
Because everyone has a TEDx talk. Everyone can get a TEDx talk. I've seen people pop up with TEDx talks. I'm like, why have you got a TEDx talk? What are you an expert in? But you got a TED Talk. That is legit.
It was a true honor. And I'm sure that there were people that were like, who put this sexual wellness person on this TED stage? Yeah, it was in Vancouver. It was 6 weeks ago now. And it was extremely cool to get to talk about sex and the imagination on this crazy famous stage. And yeah, it comes out in a week. Well, I don't know when this goes live. So it comes out June 15th.
It comes out June 15th. It'll probably come out before we release this, but I wanted to ask you what you talked about in it. What was your big main point?
Yeah, so the TED team found me because of an article, and they reached out and were like, we're doing an imagination session. So like all the speakers are talking about imagination in some way. And it seems like you could really talk about sex and the imagination. I said, absolutely. And so what I talk about is how all these kind of like rigid definitions of what sex even is hold us back from understanding the power of our own brains, and that our imagination is this huge, most important portal to pleasure that we have, which is actually super empowering because it means you don't have to wait for a partner at all to have amazing pleasure. And so that's what it's all about. I don't know if I'm the only person on the TED stage to ever use the word masturbation, but I did say the word masturbation on the TED stage. So,
well, if you are shame on them if you're the first person to bring it up. The fact that there's been no TED Talk on masturbation so far. But also what a trailblazer you are.
I don't know if that's true. There may have been, but not that I know of.
Yeah, we should definitely find that out. But that'd be if you can find that out, and that's how I'd release on YouTube, is the first person to talk about masturbation in a TED Talk. That's something.
That's the clickbait title for sure. That's the one that makes you want to click.
I want to pitch you some Dipsea stories.
Oh yeah? Hit me.
Is that okay?
Please.
Okay, here we go. A couple argues over how much money was spent on their toddler's playpen. The argument ends when the couple make love in the playpen.
Erotic. 9 out of 10.
In a weird way, it is erotic. Like, it's like, because these arguments, like, I think arguments, this is my big pitch for the Dipsea thing. Like, I think that not the Dipsea thing, for Dipsea, is if you can make someone laugh and then come, you have given them so much. A
gift.
2 gifts. Maybe multiple. And like you think about like, because it is so real to life that the little argument starts and then like before you know it, you know what I mean?
Okay. So let's take that idea and like, let's like pull it out. So they're like arguing and like someone wants to read the instructions and someone doesn't, whatever. And then you're like kind of play fighting. You're like, oh my God. And you like throw a pillow at them or something. And then one like tackles the other person and suddenly you're like, fake wrestling, and then I could see us like moving into, all right, I buy it. I can see that happening.
But it starts with the you know, the opening of the Amazon box, and the receipt is there, and you know the wife looks at the husband. She goes, 150. You paid $150 for this playpen, and then that's the beginning of like but you always like, I've sold the shoes that you bought the other day, blah, and then we go back and forth, humor, but also truth. Then the little pushes and the shoves.
Yeah, you know, the balance between real life and fantasy life is a tough one to nail. And we talk about this a lot at Dipsea, where we're like, all right, is it like, for example, sometimes people are like, I love Dipsea stories. I love how much story there is in them. I wish the sex was a little bit longer. But if we like really did a real time, like, slowdown of sex in a story, it would feel so slow. You'd be like, what's even happening? Like, I don't even know. Is something happening? Like, we have to like pick up the pace, which is part of like, you know, the magic of creating these stories. But I think something like an argument like that is like really, you almost like would have a script of a full argument and you'd be like, you know what, we're just going to take this one and then that's it. Like, that's all we can do. Where it's like, $150? Yeah. And then you like move on. You know what I'm saying? Like, we have to like keep it in its like, move the pace along.
Yeah, short and snappy, and let's get to the sex.
Yeah.
I love that. Okay, I've got a few here for you.
All right.
This one's okay. A boyfriend fulfills his girlfriend's fantasy by dressing up as her high school crush, Jonathan Taylor Thomas. He never drops character, and she loves every minute of it.
I mean, I deeply love that. I think role play is the best and so fun.
I was even thinking of Seth from the OC.
Wait, yeah. Should I know who the first character?
I think Jonathan Taylor Thomas was like, he was like Tim Allen's son in Home Improvements. He was like a 90s hottie. Maybe I'm saying someone else, but I'm talking about like, you know, I'm talking about like a Ryan Gosling.
Yeah.
Like the boyfriend dresses up as Ryan Gosling and does not drop character.
Okay. So I think like anyone that can execute not dropping character like fully without like even like laughing is a savant. It's like an amazing thing to do. So if someone like really pulls it off, it's like extremely sexy, but it's hard to pull off, you know, like Dipsea material. Absolutely. Real life material, very difficult.
Well, I was going to say actually it would be difficult to portray in Dipsea somebody who will not drop character.
Well, what we could do is just get Ryan Gosling to play himself in that part. And you'd be like, wow, his acting is amazing.
That would be...
We've solved it. We've cracked the nut.
Oh my gosh. We should reach out to his agents.
We should reach out to his agent, 100%. Do you have an ad?
Yeah, I've got two chance meeting ideas for you.
Okay.
A car accident on a hot day ends with 2 people making love in the nicer of the 2 vehicles. And an admission of being at fault is said during said sex.
Nice. I really like the specificity that the nicer vehicles where they have sex. You're setting the scene. You're making sure it's comfy. Day, the AC is blasting. Air conditioning. Nice.
Yeah. I'm thinking like a tinted window, something or other is the nicer vehicle. And the hot day, LA at noon where it's like hot
Yes.
And if you got into an accident, you're like, shit, I've got to get out of the car and talk to these people. And it's like, oh, that'd be so frustrating. And bam, if you could like quickly get each other's detail, like, we should just drive around the corner and get each other's details. And then it's on.
I think this is an idea with legs, because it does a couple of things that are fun too. You like have a lot of sound happening environment. So it's like loud highway. Right. You close the door and suddenly it's muffled. Maybe you hear some like soft like car bass, which is like super fun. I like it. I'm into it. Let's ship it.
Thank you. Okay, cool. A woman has a crush on her Pilates instructor. In the next class she takes, she's the only person who shows up, ending in ravenous lovemaking on a reformer.
We have this story. It exists.
Oh.
There's no reformer, but the exact thing is she's the only one that shows up. It's the middle of a snowstorm.
Oh, snowstorm.
It's a great story. It's called Hot Vinyasa 1. Highly recommend it. It's a great one.
That is Hot Vinyasa 1.
Mm-hmm. Which
I need to look that
implies
up.
The existence of a 2, 3, 4, 5, which there are as well.
Oh, damn. I was thinking Hot Vinyasa 1 was like a type of class. Because there is such a thing. Hot Vinyasa 2 is like, well, intermediate. Hot Vinyasa 3 is advanced.
Why don't we just make a series all over again, just with an advanced series? It adds some new technique.
Yeah. Like it's a really good yoga teacher.
Good. Yeah. Really good.
This has been so much fun chatting with you. How can we best keep up with you and what you're up to? Because you're not really on Instagram. So how do we keep up with the Gina Gutierrez story?
I know, my Instagram is filled of, boring domestic things that I like to keep out of the public eye. I also don't tweet very much, so you can't really find me there either. But you know what? All the goings on, dipseastories.com. That's where my work happens. And you'll see me on TED, hopefully very soon, June 15th.
Beautiful. And to those of you who are interested, Dipsea, get it in the App Store. It's absolutely sensational. It's the intersection of sexual well-being and storytelling. Did I say that right?
You got it right. And of course, Luke Cook stars as Jake in one of our favorite series, Act Natural. So definitely check that out.
I'm sure you'll enjoy that one. You'll enjoy that one. We came up with that ourselves, didn't we?
It was amazing. Like co-producing that with you was so fun. You had so many great ideas, and I really feel like we brought them to life. It really was a success.
I agree. Gina, this has been so much fun talking, and thanks very much. I'll talk to you soon.